we've got to talk about the defensive coordinator position.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how shocked you are. I'm pretty shocked. I thought the defensive coordinator would be in place by now. I really did. I thought it would happen by the end of last week. You got the combine coming up, and it hasn't. So what we do know is, and Mayoko finally put out something, so we now know for a fact who has been interviewed, who they plan on interviewing. One of them was Staley, who's outside of the organization, just recently off of being the Chargers head coach. Another one is Sorensen, who's the passing game coordinator, defensive coordinator here. And we know that Daniel Bullocks is going to be interviewed later in the week. As far as we know, those are the only three names that we've been made aware of, at least. So what the hell's taking them so long? I mean, two of these guys are in-house, and one of them hasn't had a job since before the season ended. What the heck?
Well, I mean, if we're going to look at just face value, they're still looking, right? Let's go half glass full first, right? They're still looking. They understand what they don't want, right? That's the beauty of firing a coach, quite honestly, is that you know exactly what you need, right? You're fresh off of an experience where it needed to be calibrated so much so that you were willing to move on after less than a year of having the man in the building. So they know what they want and they know what they don't want, which means that they curated their list to exactly the style and the abilities of the coaches that they want. So that's half glass full. Half glass empty is they've swung and they've missed on the number one choices that they want, in the top tier of choices that they want. And now they're moving on to their second tier of choices. And that is finally rolling out as far as the interviews that we're starting to hear about with Nick Sorensen and already with Brandon Staley. And next up is what's old boy the other guy, the inside guy, Bullocks, right? Yeah. So the way I see it is it's tiered, right? If I'm looking at all of the hoopla and the buzzing around, and you can honestly tell that there were some serious names that were up for selection, because you started hearing chirping from Tim Kawakami. Then we started hearing some other reports from guys that were starting to sniff around the Niners. So you already knew that the tea leaves were going, but I feel like we kind of went 0 dark 30 for a little while. There was like radio silence. And in my opinion, I kind of feel like we go through this every year. And it's not necessarily with quarterbacks, but it's with anybody that there's a rumor that the Niners are trying to go get. And isn't it a coincidence that every time there was an opportunity for the Niners, right, to acquire somebody or bring them in their organization, the Niners said no, right? Mm-hmm. The Niners were the ones who always said, no, well, we don't want Tom Brady. No, we don't really want Kirk Cousins. Vic Fangio, take a hike. We don't want Vic Fangio. And the truth is that nobody really looks at it from the other side of it, is that, well, who told the Niners no, right? Who turned us down? And I tend to believe that if you just look at like the context of it, right? If you're going to go after your whale, right? If you're going to go after Bill Belichick, that's your guy, right? You're going to wrap that up the right way, right? It's the same thing about recruiting, man. Like when you are recruiting, when I coached at Bowie State, man, and when you recruited, you didn't wait until the end of the recruiting cycle to finally go get that 4-star that you thought you can go get. No, we're taking all of our assets, head coaches coming, we're bringing the AD, maybe a pastor or two, and we're going to do everything we can to go get our guy. And we're going to make him feel like he's a priority. So Bill Belichick being, class personified for all of the things that we know, right? You don't make Bill Belichick your second, third, or fourth choice, right? And you damn sure don't let reports come out that you've interviewed. I mean, God love him. Brandon Staley, amazing guy. I mean, who am I? Right? Right? Like, let me check myself at the door, right? Nick Sorensen, amazing NFL career. Who the hell am I? I'm chopped liver. I'm a nobody. I'm sure he's a great coach. But there ain't no fucking way that them dudes are getting the interview before Bill Belichick.
No.
No way. So with that said, there could have been a possibility that the top tier, in my opinion, was Ulbrich, Mike Vrabel, Gus Bradley, and Bill Belichick. Let's say that was the top cream of the crop. And they probably gave the Niners a look, looked at looked at some of the hard boundaries that we had. Possibly we could say, hey man, we'll get rid of the DBs, but Holland stays, Kocurek stays, or hey man, Kocurek can go, but you got to run our defense. Or, I just don't see the Niners completely coming in belly up, right? Which you would need to do. And I can feel like some of those guys came through the organization, talked to Kyle, and quite possibly told us thanks, but no thanks, right? Like, we not only is this like, this is the thing, like from a fan standpoint, yes, any coach would want to coach this team, but there's a caveat to that. Any coach with nothing to lose would want to coach this team. You see what I'm saying? Wilkes was in a precarious situation where he really didn't have anything to lose. He had already been ousted 2 years in a row from 2 different teams, and quite bad. And it was kind of like, well, what else can I do? I'm next to the biggest team in the league. They're known for the compository pick situation. Like, what's the worst that can happen? So he had to be here. I kind of feel the same way about Brandon Staley. Like, I'm not impressed by that move whatsoever. In my opinion, he's the defensive Kyle Shanahan. So I don't like, that's how I feel.
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah. So I tend to kind of think that the reason it's taken this long, I mean, look at Wilkes last year. He was hired, I think, on February 7th. I know they didn't make it to a Super Bowl, but basically as soon as they could hire somebody, they did.
They got one in.
They did the same thing with DeMeco Ryans. I think he was mid-January or something after they had, lost, the season was over. So they make these decisions pretty quick. If you have 2 in-house guys and then Staley, and that's your coaches that you're interviewing, Staley was fired before the season was over. So he's been available. These 2 in-house guys, obviously available. That tells me they likely, I'm sure they didn't actually interview those other guys. They just reached out. Are you interested? Would you come here? What would it take? And maybe those guys were like, hey, I got to talk to my family. Let me do some kicking around. They started asking people around the league and did their due diligence. And for whatever reason decided, no, not for us or not for me. And so that's what I think has taken so long. And now that we've gotten to this point where the people that they probably really wanted, which are the big name guys, said, we politely decline. And the 49ers are back to regular DC hires, which I think the signs always pointed to somebody in-house. Daniel Bullocks was my guy. And maybe it does end up being Staley, but Staley is underwhelming, man. I mean, Staley, what was he, a DC for 1 year in the COVID year? Am I mistaken? I think that's the only year.
I'll bring it up. I'm not impressed by Coach Staley. And another thing that I wanted to bring up about that too, if we do go with Staley, is that we're kind of really playing around with our chi, so to speak, as far as like our team motivation and how we're built. For better or for worse, say what you want about Coach Wilkes, but he did his best DeMeco Ryans and Robert Saleh impression this year. I mean, as far as like being on the sideline, being a rah-rah guy, trying his best to rally the guys, being talkative. I mean, he did everything but go bald. Like, he tried his best. And for better or for worse, I do give him credit in that regard from being a coach that is completely the opposite. I feel like he's definitely a guy that's going to let you know how he feels, and he's a straight talker, especially, in a practice element and in the meeting room. But, him kind of like being outside of his frame, it just doesn't seem like that's like his character. Well, take that and triple it with Brandon Staley. I mean, you want to talk about no charisma, like no body of emotion, like absolutely no pulse at times. I mean, dude, there are times where like I can recall times where it was literally burning down around there. And he was like standing around with a pleasant smile on his face. Like, I'm gonna tell you, bro, like I think, and then on top of it is that I just don't think that he will be a culture fit. I think he's a little too timid, to be honest with you.